scripture reading this morning is found in Romans chapter 10 and verse 14. It says, "How then will they call on him whom they have not believed? How will they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher?" Kristina has our message at this time.
Good morning. What a blessing it is to be able to be here and share with you. Pastor Daniel sends his greetings, but he is preaching in Kannapolis this morning. And so I am, as I shared in my teaser during the children's story, going to share a story with you. One of my favorite stories. And you know, oftentimes we forget how important our stories are, because we are told that we do not have to fear for our future except if we forget our past. What is our past? Where did we come from? Who are the people that helped to found what we believe today and what we have today in the Seventh-day Adventist Church? So the story I'm going to share with you today is going to be a story and a Bible study, so you will still need your Bibles. But I just want you to be able to listen. Let's pray. Our Father, as I share this story today, I pray that we may be blessed and inspired to be like he was, to be more like you, and to be on fire for you, to share the precious messages that you have given to us. We thank you and we love you. In Jesus' name, amen. My story is about a boy preacher, and I think I'm on so I can walk around, which I'm glad. Thank you. The boy, I'm going to call him Johnny, because that's what he was as a little boy. Little Johnny was born in New York State in the year 1832. And of course, we are familiar with 1844. This is before that time, 1832. But during this time, William Miller was already going around and preaching. Jesus is coming soon. This was the message that little Johnny grew up with. Jesus is coming soon. Am I ready? Am I ready to meet him? He remembered at 8 years old going to church and listening to this message. But even before that, he remembered his dad. You see, his dad was a Methodist minister, and his dad was on fire for God. And of course, even before they heard the message that Jesus was coming soon, his dad was a very diligent preacher. He preached not just one morning a week, but he preached sometimes all day, plus evening meetings. He worked faithfully, but he wasn't just a preacher. That wasn't his full occupation. His full occupation was he was a carpenter. He was a cabinet maker. He ran a business with 17 employees under him making threshing machines, and he was the only coffin maker in the entire area. This was Johnny's dad. And as you can imagine, he worked very hard. Sometimes he would work all day, and then he would go to church in the evening, and he would preach all evening. He would work with souls, do visitations. He'd come home late at night only to find an order for a coffin needed tomorrow morning, and would spend the rest of the night handcrafting a wooden coffin, sometimes more than one. And as you can imagine, this kind of lifestyle took a toll on his health. And at a very young age, he died, leaving little Johnny an orphan. So Johnny moved from his family's home to his grandparents' house. His grandpa was also a very dedicated Christian and did everything he could to share Jesus with everyone, much to the dismay of some of his neighbors and friends. Methodists were not well liked then. And so, because grandfather was a Methodist and he was a farmer, he loved to share his faith with all of his friends, there were people who didn't like what he did and didn't like what he said. And so they decided to cause him trouble. It was not uncommon for him to come home from church and find that the fences had been clipped and all of his cows were in the garden. There was one time that he came home from church and his biggest limbs off his cherry tree were completely gone, loaded with cherries, like missing. The whole limb was sawed off. They couldn't find it anywhere, and days later, they found the limbs of these cherry trees in a pile way out in the woods with rotten cherries on them. But grandfather never complained. It made such an impression on Johnny. He would experience all this persecution, never ever complained. He always took it with a smile and said, someday they'll understand. And one day they did understand. And grandfather didn't even know about it. Apparently, grandfather had this huge field of wheat, but it wasn't visible from his house. It was off in a distance. He had quite a large farm. And this field of wheat was not quite ripe yet. It was still green. But grandfather had this idea, this year I want to do something different. I want to cut the grain before it's completely ripe and let it dry out in the field and see if I can get a better crop. And so because he wanted to do this, he hired a group of men to show up at his house on Monday morning to go out to that field and harvest it. So Monday morning came, and the group of men showed up at his house to go harvest it, and grandfather and men walked out to the field, and when they got there, the whole field was already harvested. Those evil people were trying to cause grandfather trouble, and they decided to harvest his wheat early yesterday while he was at church, and they harvested the whole field in hopes of ruining his crop. And grandfather had the best crop in town of any farmer in the whole neighborhood. And as he laughed to little Johnny, he said, the devil overshot his mark that time. Grandfather didn't even have to pay for laborers. He got free labor. They harvested his wheat, and he had the best crop in the whole town. And because he was the first farmer with the crop, he got the most money of anyone. And boy, they never troubled him again. That was the end of grandfather's troubles. Well, little Johnny went to school, and he loved to learn. He loved to read books. He loved to do science experiments. That was his favorite thing. And so he would do little odd jobs to earn a little bit of money, and he would buy materials to do science experiments. And he built all kinds of little contraptions, but his most famous one was he built his own battery out of junkyard parts and spare things. And it worked so well, it became a shocking machine. And he, of course, this was before defibrillators, he was hired as a little boy to come with doctors to their patients to do shock treatments on the patients. He earned the nickname of Little Professor because of all of his science experiments that he loved to do. Well, like I said, the meetings were going on, and people were starting to get excited about Jesus coming soon. And little Johnny and his grandfather started attending some of these meetings. They were very impressed with what they learned. Wow, Jesus coming in our lifetime? That's amazing. They listened as William Miller shared the story from Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. And you're welcome to look at it, or you may have it memorized. Unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Well, William Miller and his interpretation, he's studying prophecy, he's like, the sanctuary must be the earth. So if the sanctuary is the earth, then the sanctuary being cleansed must be Jesus' second coming. And if we follow the prophecies, the 2,300 days combined with the 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9, we find the beginning time period of when Jerusalem was decreed to be a nation. And fast forward that through, the 2,300 years came to October 22 of 1844. And Johnny thought, I won't even be an adult in 1844. Jesus is coming really soon. I need to be ready. And so he got ready, and he shared his faith with his friends, and he and his grandparents worked, and the day came, October 22, 1844. Johnny woke up, he said, Jesus is coming today. Jesus is going to come today. And the day went, and then it was noon, and then it was 6 p.m., and then the sun went down, and finally it was midnight. And Johnny had to go to bed, and he woke up the next morning. Jesus didn't come. What was wrong? Why didn't Jesus come? And there was great mourning, not only in his grandfather's house and Johnny as they cried. We thought that we were going home. We thought we were done with this old, sinful, sickly world. Why are we still here? Why didn't Jesus come? Did he not answer the prophecy in Daniel chapter 8? But what they didn't know, the prophecy in Daniel 8:14 was correct. But they didn't know what the sanctuary was. The sanctuary was the sanctuary in heaven. And that date in October 22, 1844, was when Jesus began his ministry in the most holy place, which means that Jesus is coming soon. And it's wonderful news. They just didn't know it quite yet. They were still learning. But yet, he knew in his heart, Jesus is coming soon. I love William Miller's words, and they were such an encouragement to his family. Jesus is coming today, today, today. Because we never know when he's coming. We also don't know if we'll wake up tomorrow morning, right? So live every day as if Jesus is coming today. And friends, I tell you, you look at the signs today, it is soon. Jesus is coming soon. But after this discouragement, little Johnny lost his spark. Yeah, Jesus didn't come. He went off to live with his brother. He stopped going to church. He went to a different school, got new friends, hung out with the wrong crowd. But God didn't forsake him. And God was still calling to his heart. And finally, one day, a revival came into town. And he attended those revival meetings. And he realized what he was missing. He realized his life with his friends and partying and having fun was empty. It was not fulfilling. But he found fulfillment in Jesus. He was so excited, he was baptized. And even though I've told you a lot about him, he still isn't very old. He wasn't 16 yet. He was baptized and began excitedly sharing with his friends once again. Jesus is coming soon. Jesus is coming soon. Now, back then, there wasn't Seventh-day Adventists, okay? They were called Adventists if they followed, anyone who followed William Miller were either called Millerites or Adventists because they were looking forward to Jesus' second advent. That's where the word Adventist came from. But not everyone was a Seventh-day Adventist. The Seventh-day Adventist church was not organized yet. Instead, you had bodies of believers. Many of them had been kicked out of their churches because they believed that Jesus was coming again. And they were in these clusters, meeting in homes and meeting in different areas, trying to find what Jesus really wanted them to know. How they really could understand Jesus coming soon. How could this make sense? And finally, after his 16th birthday, Johnny, who is now known as John, started having this impression where God was asking him to preach. He thought, well, that's strange. I'm not an adult. I'm a kid. I haven't even started growing my facial hair yet. What are they going to do if I go to a church with my clean face that I don't even have to use a razor yet and try to preach to these people? They're not going to listen to me. God, you are crazy. And so he put it out of his mind. But then the thought would come again. You should preach. No, God, you're crazy. I'm just a kid. I can't preach. I'm only 16. And then one day, he got malaria. Malaria is not a fun thing to go through. A lot of fever, chills. It's very painful. You're burning up one minute. You're shaking with chills the next. And he's laying in bed, and every time a chill would come, he would hear this impression, you need to go preach. And then the chill would go away, the voice would be silent. And then a little while later, a chill would come, and he would hear it again with the chill. You need to go preach. And finally said, okay, God, if this is really you, I'll go preach if you take these chills away. And they never came back. Oh no, what did he promise? He promised he would go preach. And he said, okay, God, this must be you. I'll go preach. But I don't have any decent clothes to wear. He was just a common laborer. He didn't have anything nice to wear to church. And he didn't have much money either. So a friend of his said, okay, I'll give you a pair of my dress pants. And he put them on, and they were like 2 feet too long. Because the guy was like 6 feet tall, and John was not fully grown yet, so he was pretty short. So they had to chop like all this material off of his pants to try to make it fit. But they altered them okay and singed up the waist a little bit, try to get those pants on. And he's like, you need a dress jacket, suit jacket. Everybody wore suit jackets back then, but nobody had a suit jacket they could give him. And his brother's like, I know, I have an overcoat. Now, he put this overcoat on, and it's like, dragging the ground. So he said, well, we'll just cut the tails off the overcoat, and we can turn it into a dress jacket, and you can wear it as your suit coat. So they cut the tails off. The suit jacket was still pretty long because John's short, but they made it work. And so now he's got his outfit to preach in. He got a Bible. They didn't have any money to go anywhere. But one of either his brother or one of his friends gave him $1. Now, back then, $1 went a little further than it does today. With $1, he figured, well, that will help me get some transportation to go a little ways, or at least buy some food along the way or something, so I'm not going with nothing. And then just as he was getting ready to leave, he said, where should I go? Well, where would you go if you were a boy preacher? You'd go somewhere far, far away where nobody knew you, right? That way, if I make a complete fool of myself, no one will know. I'll go back home and I'll never preach again. So he started off, and on his way out of town, a friend met him on the outskirts of town and gave him $5 worth of books. He says, you sell these books where you're preaching, and that will help give you some income along your way so that you don't starve to death. If you need to take some transportation, you can. And so he started out with $1 in his pocket and $5 worth of books slung over his shoulder and the clothes on his back. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and finally he got a long ways away to a town he'd never been to. And he walked into town and asked, are there any Adventists in this town? Because that's all you had to say back then. Everyone knew who the Adventists were, because they were the ones that they all made fun of. And so someone says, yeah, that home right down the street, they're Adventists. So he knocked on the door and said, hi, I'm an Adventist preacher. And they kind of looked at him. Okay, come on in. And so they let him inside, and they said, hey, let me help you take your overcoat off. And he's like, no. It's not my overcoat. It's actually my suit jacket. I have to leave it on. I'm sorry. So the next morning, he went to the Baptist church, met with the Baptist minister, and asked, "Can I use your church to have meetings in?" And the Baptist minister kind of looked at him, laughed like, "Yeah, sure, you can use my church. This little kid wants to preach in my pulpit. As long as it's not during my normal service, you can have it some other time." And so John spread the word through the town that he was going to preach that night. And he got there, and he was a little scared, would you? His knees were knocking a little bit, not sure what to think. Walked in that church, it was packed. Packed. Like standing room only, packed. And he got up there, and he put his Bible up, and he began to preach. And he preached his heart out. And they heard him gladly. They responded. There was many tears. There was confession of sins. They were excited to hear the message. And he was so relieved. He went back to his room that night. "I survived my first sermon, and I'm still alive." And then, the next day, he received an invitation for dinner before his next meeting to go to one of the people's houses who had come to his meetings. It's like, oh, good. He also heard through the grapevine that there were 7 ministers in his congregation that night when he had preached. Now, let me tell you, your first sermon, do you want to have a preacher in the audience? Do you want 7 of them? Especially that don't agree with you? Well, John was scared. There was one thing that terrified him more than anything else was to meet with a minister. So he just prayed, "God, help me not to have to meet with any ministers." So he goes to this family's house for dinner and sits down, and they invite him in, and he's having some pleasant conversation. All of a sudden, the door opens, and in walks the Baptist minister that he had reserved the church with. And he wasn't happy either. And John thought, "Oh no, God, please help me. This guy's a learned man, and I'm just a kid. I don't know anything. There's no way I could have a debate with him." And he sat down, and he folded his arms. He's like, "So, you had quite a crowd there last night." And John said, "Yeah, they acted really interested in what I said." Mister's like, "Yeah, they just wanted to hear a boy preach. They'd never heard a boy preach before. They just came for the entertainment." He's like, "But I have a question for you." John's like, "Oh no, here it goes. Here it goes." He says, "Did I understand you to say last night that the soul is not immortal? That when you die, you sleep in the grave until Jesus comes? Did I hear you say that correctly?" John's like, "Well, that's what I said. I don't know what you heard." He's like, "Well, I have a question for you. Have you ever heard the Bible verse that says, 'These go into everlasting punishment, the death that never dies'?" John looked at him. He said, "Well, sir, half of what you said is in the book of Matthew, and the other half is in the Methodist hymnal." Minister looked at him. No, you're wrong. I'm telling you what I said is in the book of Revelation chapter 25. And John said, "I think you meant Matthew 25, because Matthew 25 is where that first half of the verse came from that you quoted, and the other half was in the hymnal." Baptist minister said, no, I'm telling you, it's Revelation 25. The whole verse is there, and I'll show you. And John said, "Sir, I'm afraid you're 3 chapters out of the Bible. Have you ever looked to see how many chapters in the book of Revelation? There's 22. So the Baptist minister grabs his Bible and says, "I'm going to show you. I'll prove it." And he starts looking in the Old Testament. paging through the Old Testament. Paging through the Old Testament. Finally looked up and said, can someone help me find the book of Revelation? So John quietly went over, turned the pages to the book of Revelation, chapter 22, and just waited. The minister looked, turned some more pages, looked again. He looks up, he says, folks, I'd love to stay with you longer, but I have another appointment that I must meet. I am late. I'm sorry, I have to go. And he ran out the door and slammed it. And everyone just sat there in shock. And so did John. Would you be in shock? His worst fear, a minister. He had nothing to be afraid of. And the people looked at John and they said, we had no idea the minister didn't know much about the Bible. And John said, well, apparently some ministers study a lot of other books besides the Bible. And so that night, more people came to the meetings. It was packed. There was people outside listening in the windows. And the meetings went on for a couple of nights, and then the Baptist minister showed up and he said, tomorrow night's meeting is going to be canceled because there is a singing inspiration that has been scheduled in this church for during that time. So there will not be another meeting tomorrow night. And someone else popped up in the congregation and said, that Baptist minister planned the singspiration just to close your meetings, but we've already met with the trustees of the school board, and we invite you to move your meetings to the schoolhouse, and you can continue. And so the meetings continued night after night, and many people were converted because of John's preaching. And he went home after that preaching trip, and he knew for a fact that God had called him. But the story doesn't end there. And of course, I could tell you all day stories, but I have to tell you at least one more. Is that okay? Can I tell you one more story about John? We can't leave him hanging there after his first preaching trip. Well, he became a full preacher at this point because he knew for a fact that God was calling him to preach. But then he started hearing rumors about some of these Adventist groups that had some new light. They were learning about Revelation chapter 13 and who this lamb-like beast was. They were learning about the sanctuary message. They had these new charts that were different than the ones that William Miller had. And then he found out that some of them were keeping the seventh-day Sabbath. Horrors. Everyone knows that Sunday's the Sabbath. Why are they going to church on Saturday? Well, he and a bunch of other Adventist preachers, they were called, later became distinguished as First-day Adventists and Seventh-day Adventists, depending on which day you went to church on. And he and 7 other first-day Adventist preachers decided, we are going to attend one of these meetings, and we're going to set them straight. We're going to show them from the Bible that Sunday is the Sabbath. So they went to their Bibles, and they put their list of Bible verses together, and they had it all ready to go. And that night, John had a dream. And in his dream, he walked into a room of people, and he recognized them as Adventists that he worshiped with. The room was dark. The walls were moldy, and the windows weren't open. It was really stuffy in the room, and everybody in the room was just sad, really sad. And then he walked into another room, and he didn't recognize any of the people. There was this speaker speaking, and he had an interesting-looking chart that he was using, and he was preaching. But everybody in the room was happy. Everybody in the room had peace. The room was well lit. The windows were open. The doors were open. Everybody was joyous in the room. He thought, man, I'd like to go in that room. He woke up and realized it was all a dream. Didn't think anything of it till that evening when he went to the meeting to prove these Adventists wrong who are keeping this seventh-day Sabbath. He walked into the room, and it looked strangely familiar, like he'd seen it before. And the guy who got up to speak, he recognized as the man he'd seen in his dream. He pulled out a chart, and he recognized that chart as the chart he'd seen in his dream. He looked around, and going on? I recognize all this from my dream. And he's sitting on the back row, and he's got his list of Bible verses, and like, I'm going to pay attention to this. The man got up, who, ironically, his name was also John. Another young preacher, just like this John. And John says from the pulpit, I had my message all planned out of what I was going to speak today. But last night I had a dream, and I was impressed to change my topic. And so my topic tonight is on the seventh-day Sabbath. And the first verse that he began to preach from was the very first verse on John's list. Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. And as he preached and shared how the law that was nailed to the cross was not the Ten Commandment law. It was the law of sacrifices and ceremonies found in the laws of Moses. And that God's law is eternal. John's like, well, I got to check that verse off my list. Then he went to the next one. And he talked about how the disciples met on the first day of the week in Acts chapter 20, verse 7. And John's like, oh, that's the second verse on my list. And he shared how the disciples were actually meeting on Saturday night. They were saying goodbye to Paul. And they talked so long that Paul talked the whole long night, which is why Eutychus fell out of the window. He fell asleep while Paul was talking. By the time he finished, it was Sunday morning. It was daylight. Yeah, that was the first day of the week, but it wasn't a church service. That was a farewell gathering. Well, John had to mark that off his list. And then he went to 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 2. And John looked and, that's on my list too. And that was the verse that talked about how when Paul came, he didn't want to wait for them to run home from church and go find their offerings. They needed to set their offering aside on the first day of the week. So when they came to church on Sabbath, they already had it in their purse ready to go. It's like, that verse doesn't talk about Sunday either. Well, knock that off his list. And one by one, all of the verses on his list by the end of that sermon were completely gone. He'd crossed off every single one of them. And he was convicted. The seventh day is the Sabbath. 1 month later, he became a Seventh-day Adventist preacher. And we know him today as John Loughborough. John Loughborough. One of the lesser known, but one of the greatest Adventist preachers and evangelists that there was. A young boy who was willing to serve God, even as a boy, because God called him to preach. My friends, Jesus is coming soon. That was the message that John shared. The preacher that he listened to that checked off all the verses off his list for him was John Andrews. Friends, I could tell you story after story of our Adventist pioneers who gave all for Jesus. They gave all because they believed that Jesus is coming soon, and they wanted everyone to be ready. Do we have the same fervor and enthusiasm today as they did then? Because our message is still here. Jesus is coming soon, and it's nearer now than it was then. It's exciting. In Revelation chapter 22, verse 12, Jesus says, I come quickly. My reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. Friends, I just want to ask you today, if you have not already, or maybe you already have and you just need to recommit again, will you decide with me today to share Jesus with those around you? To be excited about Jesus, to realize he loves you so much. He wants to have a relationship with you, and he has a work for you to do today, every single one of you, no matter your age. If you are willing to commit to this, I am going to ask our song leader to come, and we will sing our closing hymn. I ask you to stand with me as we sing our closing hymn, and I don't remember the number. 212. 'Tis almost time for the Lord to come. Number 212.